It was a cold, silent Christmas night. The snow outside blanketed the neighborhood in a pristine white glow, and the occasional creak of the old house only added to the eerie stillness. Claire had just finished setting the last of the gifts under the tree and was ready to head to bed when she heard the faint sound of bells jingling. She paused, brushing it off as her imagination. It was late, after all. But then came a second sound, a soft scraping, like metal against glass. Claire froze. The sound was coming from the living room window. Grabbing a fireplace poker, she crept toward the sound. Her heart pounded as she peered out through the frosted window. There was nothing but darkness, the street light barely illuminating the front yard. She sighed, shaking her head. Maybe it was just the wind. As she turned to leave, she noticed something. One of the stockings hanging over the fireplace had fallen to the floor. Strange, she thought, as she reached down to pick it up. She was sure they'd been securely fastened earlier. Before she could dwell on it, there was a loud thud from the roof, followed by a slow, deliberate creak. Claire's eyes darted upward. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed above her, and for a moment, her mind flashed to the stories her grandmother used to tell her about the other Santa Claus. The one who didn't bring gifts but took something far more precious. No, she whispered to herself. It's just a squirrel, or a branch. But then the footsteps began moving, downward. The sound traveled toward the chimney, slow and steady, as though something heavy was descending. Claire clutched the fireplace poker tighter, her knuckles white. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. The sound stopped. She stared at the empty fireplace, waiting. Listening. Suddenly, the fire died, leaving only a faint wisp of smoke curling upward. The room plunged into darkness, save for the dim, multicolored glow of the Christmas tree lights. And then, there was a cough. A low, raspy sound, coming from the chimney. Claire took a step back, her legs trembling. Before she could react, something fell from the fireplace, a black, heavy sack. It landed with a wet thud, and a rancid smell filled the room, like rotting meat. Her stomach churned as the sack twitched. Something inside was moving. A deep, guttural laugh came from the chimney. Not a jolly ho-ho-ho, but something dark and menacing, as if the creature were mocking her fear. Slowly, a hand emerged from the chimney. It was not the hand of a jolly old elf, it was gnarled and blackened, the nails long and sharp, like claws. Claire screamed and bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the entire house had come alive, trapping her inside. Behind her, the sound of wet, heavy breathing grew louder. She turned just in time to see a figure emerge from the fireplace. It was dressed in red, but the suit was tattered and stained, the fur trim matted with something dark. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but she could see the faint glint of yellow eyes, glowing like embers in the dark. A long, jagged grin stretched across its face, revealing crooked, yellowed teeth. "Have you been good this year?" it rasped, its voice echoing like nails scraping against metal. Claire couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She stumbled backward as the figure stepped closer, dragging the sack behind it. The smell grew stronger, making her gag. It opened the sack, revealing its contents, not gifts, but bones. Human bones. A skull rolled out, its hollow eyes staring directly at her. "No!" Claire screamed, finally finding her voice. She threw the fireplace poker at the creature, but it passed right through, as if it were made of smoke. The thing laughed again, a deep, bone-chilling sound. "You can't escape, Claire," it whispered. "Not tonight." The Christmas tree lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into complete darkness. Claire's screams were cut off as the sack engulfed her, the fabric twisting and tightening around her body. The next morning, the house was quiet. The police arrived after a neighbor reported the screams, but there was no sign of Claire. The only thing they found was a single stocking hanging above the fireplace, now stained with blood. And outside, in the freshly fallen snow, were hoofprints leading away from the house. The breakup of a 2-year relationship left me single again. The first few months were spent on Tinder as a way to fill the void, swiping right, swiping left, connecting with a few people but getting nowhere. One day, I matched with Tracy, a pretty and interesting girl. She gave me her Snapchat, but she just looked at my story without really engaging. Things went on like that, until last December, when I posted a Christmas story. Tracy commented out of the blue, suggesting we do something together. That was the start of a chain of events that I wish I had never agreed to. Tracy offered to come to my house to help me put up the Christmas tree. The invitation came at a time when I was at my loneliest, and it was hard to refuse. I prepared everything: wine, a warm house, and a little anticipation. At 9 p.m., she showed up. I opened the door, and immediately noticed something strange. She was taller than I thought, at least 6 feet. Her perfume was strong but seemed to mask something else, making me feel uneasy without knowing why. We started setting up the tree, chatting in the warm glow of the lights. But as I went downstairs to get my box, the dizziness set in. Everything in my head was fuzzy. I tried to regain my balance and went back to the living room, but Tracy was gone. When I woke up, I was lying on the couch, the room pitch black. My head was spinning, my limbs heavy. I tried to reach for my phone to check the time. The light from the screen immediately revealed a tall figure standing right in front of me. My heart stopped. "Tracy?" I called desperately, but there was no response. I turned on the flashlight on my phone, shining the light directly on her face. Tracy stood still, staring down at me. But she was no longer the cheerful girl on Tinder. Her eyes were empty and cold. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. She muttered a few incoherent words, then suddenly dashed toward the stairs, her heavy footsteps sounding like hammers on wooden floors. Then there was a loud bang from the front door. By the time I had the strength to stand, Tracy was gone, without a trace. I searched the house. Every prescription bottle, every vitamin, and even a bottle of vodka were gone. I called the police, giving them the only information I had: her Snapchat name, Tracy Gibson. But that was all there was to it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her tall figure and empty eyes haunted my mind. Who was she? And why did things turn out like this? In the months that followed, I tried to forget about it all by throwing myself into work and dating my new girlfriend, Charlotte. This December, we decided to rent a cozy Airbnb in the Poconos Mountains for Christmas. The cottage was beautiful with holiday decorations, a hot tub on a wooden deck, and a peaceful space surrounded by snow. Everything was perfect, until Tom showed up. The first night, a man who called himself Tom, the Airbnb host's brother, knocked on the door. He smiled warmly and said if we needed anything, just call. But from the start, I could tell something was wrong, the way he looked around the house, his eyes lingering longer on Charlotte. The next day, when the hot water problem occurred, Tom went into the house to check it out. But when I texted Mike, the real landlord, he replied that there was no brother named Tom. My heart pounded and I immediately told Charlotte to pack her things. As we got into the car, Tom suddenly appeared behind us, approaching the Jeep. Without thinking, I stepped on the gas and sped down the gravel road, leaving the house and the strange man behind. In the rearview mirror, his eyes were still following us, cold and scary. We called the police as soon as we left. Mike reported that when they arrived, the house was empty, with no sign of anyone. But I knew what I saw was real. To this day, I still don't know who Tom really is or what his intentions are. But clearly, not all Airbnb stays are the peace you'd expect. It was a cold December night, just a week before Christmas. My family had a tradition of spending the holidays at our summer house in the Hamptons, New York. This time of year, the Hamptons were always eerily quiet. Most of the properties belonged to wealthy people who spent their winters elsewhere. My dad and I arrived at the house first since my mom and sister had to work until the weekend. Dad was retired by then, and I was on winter break from school, so we decided to go ahead and settle in. The house sat at the end of a secluded cul-de-sac, surrounded by a vast, snow-covered lawn. My dad busied himself with turning on the heat and water, while I hauled in my PS3 to pass the time. I spent most of that first day gaming in my room, enjoying the solitude. That night, a massive snowstorm hit, blanketing the neighborhood in a thick layer of white. The howling winds rattled the windows, but we were relieved to have arrived early and avoided dangerous roads. The next morning, as I stumbled into the kitchen, Dad asked, "When did you make the snowman?" Confused, I replied, "What snowman?" He led me to the back door. Through the frosted glass, I saw a snowman standing in our yard. It had stick arms raised toward the sky, a face made of stones, and a wide, unsettling smile carved into its head. Its dark eyes seemed to stare directly at the house. "I didn't make that," I told Dad. He chuckled. "Probably some neighborhood kids. Don't worry about it. Just a harmless prank." But something about it didn't sit right with me. The second night, things took a sinister turn. I was fast asleep when a loud thud jolted me awake. The sound had come from my window. My heart pounded as I lay frozen under the covers, straining to listen. Maybe snow had fallen from the roof? After a few tense minutes, curiosity got the better of me. I crept to the window and peeked out. A scream escaped my throat before I could stop it. Standing right outside was another snowman, this one much closer than before. Its face was different, though. Instead of a cheerful smile, it wore a twisted, furious scowl. Its stick arms were now pointed straight at my window. Dad rushed into my room. "What's going on?" I pointed at the window, trembling. He frowned, muttering about neighborhood kids taking things too far. He promised to speak with their parents in the morning. That night, I refused to sleep in my room, opting instead to stay in my sister's. The next day, Dad knocked on the neighbor's door, but no one was home. Their driveway was empty, and it became clear they hadn't been in town for days. They were the only family nearby with children. The mystery deepened, and the unease settled heavier on both of us. For nearly a week, nothing unusual happened. Then came Christmas Eve. By this time, the rest of the family had joined us, my mom, sister, and all four of my grandparents. We were gathered in the living room, chatting before dinner. The festive atmosphere was interrupted by an unexpected knock at the front door. It wasn't the cheerful ding of the doorbell, but a slow, deliberate series of raps. Dad got up and called out, "Who is it?" A voice from the other side replied, "Please, let me in. I need help." There were no windows near the door, so we couldn't see who was speaking. Dad asked, "What do you need?" The voice sounded desperate. "I have nowhere to go for Christmas. Please, just let me in." We all exchanged uneasy glances. Dad shouted back, "You need to leave, or I'll call the police." The voice softened. "All right. I'll go. Please don't call the cops." He never opened the door. But that night, we all felt the same creeping dread. It had to be connected to the snowmen. The next morning, Christmas Day, we found a note taped to the front door. The scrawled handwriting read, "I just wanted to have some fun. I made the snowmen for the boy in the house. I'm sorry if I upset you. I don't have anyone to spend Christmas with. It hurts to be alone." The message chilled me to the core. Whoever had left it wasn't just playing a prank. They'd been watching us. Building snowmen in our yard. Standing outside my window. Knocking on our door. Dad and I agreed, this wasn't some harmless joke. It was deeply unsettling. Though we never found out who left the note, we couldn't shake the feeling that we'd narrowly escaped something much darker. Christmas wasn't the same that year. Even now, the memory of those snowmen, and their eerie, staring faces, haunts me.